Bobby Darin. Let's go to Bobby Darin. We got Harriet Wasser out of bed.
I hope we're going to play Mac the Knife if we're going to talk about Bobby Darin.
Why should we?
What
Haven't
do
you
you
heard
mean?
it enough?
No. No, if we're going to talk, you got to have it.
No. Harriet Wasser, who's the historian and friend of Bobby Darin's, and she was with him from the very beginning. Is that right, Harriet? Yeah. Now, where did you meet him? When he was in the Bronx, or?
No. He was in Manhattan. Well, it was when you say was he in the Bronx, I met him when he already had was, you know, he was growing as an artist. He had done a few records, and he had known, you know, he had a very close relationship with Don Kirshner, and had recorded several records with Atco Records, which was part of Atlantic.
Right.
And we, you know, I think the story has been told, but when I met him, he was already on his way to becoming a
About what year was that, Harriet?
This was 1957. And he was
at
very
Hanson's,
young.
Harriet, right?
He was very young. What?
At Hanson's?
Excuse me. Well, I met him at Hanson's, yeah. And
what is Hanson's?
Hanson's, they always refer to it as a drugstore, but it really isn't a drugstore. It wasn't really a drugstore.
Wasn't it like
was
Schwab's
really,
in California?
Yeah, it
Oh.
was like the kind of a
Soda
place where,
Yeah.
when you talk about a drugstore, you talk about going in there and buying I don't mean drugs. And
No, not like Dwayne Reed in New York. You're talking
No.
about
With a soda fountain.
like a soda fountain, a showbiz hangout for young
exactly.
people. Yes,
It was like
young
a soda
actors.
fountain place.
Yeah.
That's the best way to describe it.
Well, that's why I'm here.
Exactly.
You're here because God created you.
I just immediately.
And I don't think they knew what to call it at that time.
No, they called it a drugstore.
But they called it a drugstore.
Okay.
And everybody just loved this guy so much. He just, I don't know how he got away with some of the things he did. It was amazing to me.
Like what?
It was amazing.
Like what?
Like what?
What did he get away with?
Well, first of all, when I met him, he was not a name. He was just growing, as I said, as an artist, and he wanted everybody to love him. I mean, he wanted to be. It was important to him to have people around him who cared about him, who felt that he was the king, if you want to call it that, you know, and. It wasn't until he became very successful. Well, yeah, I'd say very successful. That anybody started to talk about how difficult he was, how getting into David's book. I said to David today, I said, boy, when his fans read this book.
Well, what did he do that we
They're
couldn't
not
believe he
gonna
got away
know.
with, Harriet? What did he get away with? Being difficult?
I don't know any stars, quote, stars, who are not difficult people.
Harriet, I was told that from the beginning he acted like a star.
Exactly. And that was, in other words, if he'd walk down the street and he'd shake your hand, you felt that you were shaking your hand of a star.
You know, Joey, I always believe...
And he was nobody.
Stars are born.
He was...
You know, you could become famous.
Yeah.
But you're born a star. I mean, some stars never become famous, but they still have that kind of personality where in their group they're just very magnetic. And you are a star that is by how you're born. But becoming famous is another thing.
Well, that's what Harriet was saying. He carried himself like
he was carrying himself like a star.
Harriet told me when I interviewed her initially that when she met Bobby, she knew immediately that he was unique, he was special. She'd never seen him sing, and yet she became immediately totally involved with him and wanted to help him.
Yeah.
That was the impact he had on people.
Joel, when did you meet him?
I met him in '63 or '64 when I was on the radio in Philly at WHAT-FM, and my first encounter with him was not a pretty sight. He had made a record called Bobby Darin Sings Ray Charles, which I hated, and I was a gigantic Ray Charles fan, so if anybody did anything that had anything to do with Ray Charles, I was, immediately against them. He heard about it, and he came up to the station, and you know Sid, Mark.
Yes.
So Sid and I were on the same station. Sid had attributed the Sinatra remark to him, which he really never made, that he buried Sinatra by the time he was 25. So he heard about what we had said about him. So he came to the station really after Sid but he took me on as like an added bonus, like a feature, like a 4-rounder, and it was really ugly. He was. But here's the thing: Sid and I both had big mouths, and we were, you know what a Philly radio was like. And he came in. He was a little guy, but he had a vibe and a half. And he had a sneer like Sir Cedric Hardwicke, in those movies. Whoa. And he just came in there, and he wasn't afraid. Sid's 6'5", I'm 6'1". He came in and he just wailed. He buried both of us. I got a little snotty with him, for him. He didn't care. He just sneered,
Yeah.
So he really had that vibe you were talking about. And I dug him. I just didn't dig the Ray Charles thing. The next time I met him was at the Latin Casino outside of Philly, and he had that arrogant thing going. I'll tell you a real quick story. Nesui Erdogan was one of the principals at Atlantic. Bobby had come back to Atlantic Records after a little sojourn at Capitol, and I was living in Philly and working in New York, so I commuted every day. He said, "You going back to Philly tonight?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Stop at the Latin Casino," which was in Jersey across the river from Philly, and, send our regards to Bobby, see if he needs anything, just, go in and do the right thing. So I go to the dressing room at the Latin Casino before the show. I was hoping he didn't remember me from the radio station. I had my, like my head covered. I say, "Hey, Bobby, how you doing?" Joel Dorn, Nesui and the guys at Atlantic said to say hello, send their love. Anything I can do for you? He said, "Yeah, there's something you can do for me." I said, "What's that?" He said, "You can tell me why your company only shipped 25,000 copies of my record. There should be 100,000 copies. It's a hit single. Who do you think you are?" And he's wailing, just screaming at me in the dressing room. And he took a breath. And I said, "You familiar with the term low man on the totem pole, Bobby?" So he said, "Yeah," like that. So I said, "Well, at Atlantic Records, the low man on the totem pole stands on my shoulders." I said, "I'm the assistant jazz guy. I make $250 a week. I take home $197. I got nothing to do with anything that has anything to do with your record, pal." He said, "Come here." And we sat down on the couch, and I had the most delightful conversation with this guy.
So finally you became friends.
We weren't friends, I mean, he didn't remember me 3 minutes later, but he was a charming guy.
But he was nice to you.
He was a sharp
The
guy.
main thing was he did not want to be loved.
You just said he wanted to be loved by everybody.
No. Before he happened,
Yeah.
it was important because he wanted to make it.
Oh.
And that was, that's what he thought. I'll be nice to this person. Maybe this person will help me. Maybe, But once he started to happen, he wanted you to be, you didn't ever know where he was coming from. You didn't know what kind of comment. You had no idea.
He wanted to make it on his talent.
Absolutely. I remember he always told this story about Pat Boone. He said Pat Boone and Eddie Fisher, they had to. He says if they had divorced their wives, their careers are over.
Take a break. We'll be right back. Joey Reynolds Show, live from New York.